The rain had been relentless all morning, washing the city streets in a silvery sheen that reflected the gray skies. Clara Jennings, exhausted from working 3 jobs just to keep her tiny apartment afloat, was crouched by the sink of her cramped apartment, scrubbing a stubborn coffee stain from the only dress she owned that didn't look like it had been through a war zone. Her phone buzzed insistently in her pocket, startling her. She wiped her hands on a rag and answered with a weary hello. A calm, controlled male voice came through the line. "Ms. Jennings, my name is Adrian Cross. I represent Mr. Jonathan Hayes. He requires your presence for an urgent matter regarding a potential job opportunity. Will you be available today at 2 p.m.? Clara nearly laughed aloud. A job? After the endless job applications and rejection emails, a real offer felt almost surreal. I don't know," she said cautiously. "What kind of job?" "Companion," the man replied evenly. "More specifically, a contracted role as a partner for social events and private functions. 6 months, legally binding, fully compensated." Clara's mouth fell open. "You mean a fake girlfriend?" "Precisely," Adrian said. "You fit the profile." Clara glanced down at her worn sneakers, her threadbare sweater, and the apartment she could barely afford. Her mother's medical bills, her overdue rent, her endless responsibilities, everything pressed down on her. And now, somehow, here was a chance that could change everything. She hesitated. "Is this safe?" "Completely legal," Adrian assured her. "All contracts are reviewed. Your duties are simple. Attend functions, maintain the image, follow Mr. Hayes' guidelines. Nothing else. Your discretion is paramount. Are you willing to meet him today?" Clara took a deep breath, glanced out the rain-streaked window at the city she felt trapped in, and made a decision. "I'll be there," she said. 2 hours later, she found herself standing before a skyscraper that seemed to scrape the clouds themselves. The elevator ride was silent, but her heart thundered in her chest. Clara had never stepped into a world like this. Marble floors, gleaming chrome, men and women in suits that must have cost more than her apartment. When the doors opened, a tall figure waited. Jonathan Hayes. Even from a distance, he radiated power and precision. Yet something in his gaze seemed distant, guarded. "Ms. Jennings," he said, voice low but commanding, "thank you for coming. Let's be brief. You need money. I need a partner. Can we agree to a simple arrangement?" Clara swallowed her nerves. I think so," she whispered. And with that simple exchange, a deal was made. Little did either of them know, this arrangement would not remain as simple as either expected. The office door closed behind Clara with a soft click, cutting off the faint hum of the elevators and leaving her in a world that seemed both dazzling and intimidating. The scent of polished wood and faint citrus filled the air. Jonathan Hayes motioned for her to sit in one of the leather chairs, his posture rigid yet composed. Clara lowered herself carefully, every muscle tense. "You're nervous," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. His voice was calm, measured, and it carried a weight that made Clara's pulse quicken. She forced herself to nod. "I suppose I am," she admitted. Jonathan leaned back slightly, steepling his hands. "Good, it means you care. Most people walk in here thinking they're auditioning for a paycheck. They forget this is about appearances, about perception." Clara tilted her head, curiosity sparking despite her apprehension. "So it's not just about pretending?" she asked softly. "It never is," Jonathan replied, his gaze sharpening in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. "People notice authenticity, even in lies." Clara bit her lip. She had survived by pretending most of her life, smiling when her heart ached, performing cheerfulness when she was exhausted, making the world think she was fine when she was anything but. And now, it seemed, she had been chosen to perform a role that required every ounce of that skill, but in a place where the stakes were higher than she could imagine. Jonathan handed her a folder. Inside were photographs, invitations, and a calendar of events she was expected to attend. Charity galas, business dinners, even private weekend retreats. Each event meticulously detailed, every interaction scripted to maintain an impeccable image. He paused at the last page. "You'll notice something," he said. "There's one thing no one can script, and that is how people respond to each other. That, Clara, is where the challenge and the opportunity lies. Her eyes flicked up, meeting his. There was a strange intensity there, a quiet magnetism that made it impossible to look away. And yet, there was also a subtle sadness, a shadow she couldn't quite place. She felt an unexpected pang of curiosity and perhaps something more unsettling, a flutter she couldn't name. Over the next hour, Jonathan guided her through what would be her first event, a high-profile art auction downtown. He explained how to carry herself, what to say, how to avoid awkward pauses. Clara listened, absorbing every detail, her mind racing with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. When he finally dismissed her to prepare, she felt as if she were stepping onto a stage that stretched far beyond the city skyline, one where every misstep could cost more than just her dignity. Hours later, dressed in a sleek navy gown borrowed from a friend, who swore it had just the right touch of elegance and mystery, Clara arrived at the auction. The room buzzed with sophistication, laughter, clinking glasses, and quiet, competitive murmurs over the art on display. Jonathan waited at the center, calm, composed, a figure of effortless authority. Clara's heart pounded as she approached. She felt exposed, like a secret about to be revealed. Jonathan's eyes found hers, and for the briefest moment, the calculated mask slipped. A flicker of warmth, or was it acknowledgement, passed between them. She wasn't sure, and she didn't dare ask. The night unfolded with meticulous precision. Clara smiled, laughed at the right moments, nodded thoughtfully, and followed Jonathan's subtle cues. She was performing, yes, but something strange began to happen. In the midst of rehearsed gestures, her laughter felt genuine, her words carried emotion, and she noticed Jonathan noticing her. Small things, a glance, a raised eyebrow, a barely perceptible smile made her feel seen in ways she hadn't felt in years. As the evening wound down, the two of them stood by a balcony overlooking the city lights, the air crisp and charged with unspoken tension. Clara's chest tightened. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why me? Why choose someone like me?" Jonathan's gaze lingered on her face, thoughtful. "I didn't choose someone like you," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "I chose you. And you're not what I expected either. That, Clara, is the truth about life. You can never predict what will matter most until it's already in front of you." A silence stretched between them, comfortable yet heavy, as if the universe had paused to let them feel the weight of that moment. Clara looked down, cheeks flushed, mind spinning. She didn't know what the next months would bring, or how a simple arrangement could evolve into something neither of them could have anticipated. But she knew this: life had just changed in ways she could not yet comprehend. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of something extraordinary. And in that quiet, electric pause, the seed of something profound had already been planted, a connection that defied plans, contracts, and expectations, waiting to grow into something neither Clara nor Jonathan could have scripted. The morning after the auction, Clara woke to the soft hum of the city outside her window, the streets glistening from last night's rain. She stretched, a strange mixture of anticipation and unease settling over her like a heavy blanket. The events of the previous evening played over in her mind: the laughter, the whispered conversations, the way Jonathan had looked at her from across the room. She told herself it had been part of the arrangement, a performance. Yet her heart refused to comply with logic. Her phone buzzed insistently. A message from Adrian. "Mr. Hayes expects you at 10 a.m. sharp for your first business luncheon. Details in the folder. Be punctual." Clara exhaled. She had known this was coming, but the thought of another meticulously orchestrated social performance made her stomach twist. By the time she arrived at the hotel where the luncheon was being held, Clara's nerves were frayed. She checked her reflection in the glass doors, smoothing the hem of her dress and adjusting her hair. She felt like a visitor in a world she had only ever glimpsed from afar, and yet, for reasons she could not explain, part of her was eager to step further in. Jonathan was already there, seated at the head of the table, reviewing documents with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. When his gaze landed on her, it felt as if the entire room had gone silent. Clara's pulse quickened. There was a magnetism to him that was impossible to ignore, something in the quiet confidence of his posture that demanded attention and respect. Yet beneath it, a subtle vulnerability flickered, hidden, fleeting, yet undeniable. As the luncheon began, Clara followed Jonathan's cues with painstaking care. She laughed softly when appropriate, nodded thoughtfully at business points she barely understood, and spoke when prompted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She noticed how effortlessly Jonathan commanded the room, not through volume or aggression, but through the simple act of presence. People leaned in when he spoke, they listened, and yet, he seemed to reserve the most genuine attention for her. Subtle gestures and fleeting looks that spoke volumes in silence. After the luncheon, Jonathan led her to a quiet terrace overlooking the city skyline. The wind tugged gently at her hair, and for a moment, the city's noise faded into the background. Clara hesitated, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. The tension between them had grown into something neither of them had named yet, but it was palpable, a current running just beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. "You're learning faster than I expected," Jonathan said, his voice low and thoughtful. "Most people would be exhausted after only one evening. You, however, seem composed." Clara tilted her head, uncertain how to respond. "I'm trying," she admitted, the words sounding weaker than she felt. He studied her carefully, the kind of scrutiny that made her feel both exposed and understood. "Trying isn't enough," he said softly, almost to himself. "You have to invest something real. Even when everything around you is pretend, that's how people recognize authenticity." Her breath caught. There was a strange beauty in his words, a truth she had felt in fleeting moments of her life, but never fully acknowledged. She realized then that the arrangement, the contract, the pretense, they were no longer the most important things. What mattered now was what they couldn't plan, couldn't script, couldn't control, the quiet, undeniable pull between them. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Clara learned the rhythm of her new world, the dinners, the galas, the endless stream of faces and expectations, and through it all, Jonathan was there, calm, steady, observing, guiding. Yet beneath his composed exterior, Clara began to see glimpses of a man shaped by loss and solitude, a man who had mastered control in every arena of life except for the one he was now facing, the unpredictable force of human connection. One evening, after a particularly long charity event, Jonathan suggested they walk along the riverfront, the city lights reflected in the water, and the cool breeze carried the faint scent of rain. Clara stayed close, careful to maintain the distance the contract demanded, yet something compelled her to linger near him. "You know," Jonathan said suddenly, his voice quieter than usual, "this arrangement is supposed to be simple, businesslike, clear boundaries, and yet I find myself breaking them. Every time you're near." Clara stopped, startled, her heart hammered in her chest. "Breaking boundaries?" she asked, unsure whether she wanted the answer. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to look at the river, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "I didn't expect this, not from you, not at all. You make me feel things I haven't felt in years, and it terrifies me." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had known there was something unspoken, something growing between them, but hearing it acknowledged made the world tilt slightly off its axis. She wanted to speak, to reassure him, to tell him she felt it too. Yet the words lodged in her throat, and in that silence, thick with tension and unspoken truth, Clara realized something undeniable. What had begun as a contract, a mere performance, had already transformed into something far more powerful, something real, something worth daring to explore. The river flowed quietly beside them, indifferent to the turmoil, and hope stirring between two hearts that had met by chance, yet were slowly discovering that fate had far grander plans than either could have imagined. As they turned back toward the city, Clara knew the next step would be the hardest of all, acknowledging the truth of what was happening between them and confronting the possibility that what started as a pretense might become the most authentic connection either of them had ever known. The following week brought a rhythm Clara had not anticipated, one that felt both thrilling and exhausting. Mornings were spent rehearsing conversations, practicing expressions, and memorizing the names of people she barely knew but was expected to charm. Afternoons brought social engagements, each more elaborate than the last. Through it all, Jonathan remained a constant presence, poised, meticulous, and quietly attentive in ways that unsettled Clara more than she wanted to admit. One evening, after a long day of back-to-back events, Jonathan suggested they take a detour through a small park on the way back to his penthouse. The city had quieted, leaving only the soft hum of distant traffic and the occasional chirp of a night bird. Clara walked beside him, heels clicking softly against the pavement, her mind still buzzing from the day's performances. "Clara," Jonathan began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I want you to understand something. What we're doing, it isn't supposed to mean anything beyond the contract, but every time I'm near you, I feel myself forgetting that." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She glanced up at him, searching his eyes for reassurance or perhaps confirmation that she was not imagining this magnetic tension between them. "I feel it too," she admitted quietly, surprising herself with the honesty. She had rehearsed her responses countless times, yet no script could capture the truth that had begun to root itself deep in her chest. Jonathan stopped walking and turned fully to face her. The streetlights glinted off his hair, highlighting the sharp lines of his face softened by the vulnerability in his gaze. "It's dangerous," he said, almost to himself, "for both of us. The world we live in, people will judge, misunderstand, and assume things. But I cannot ignore what I feel, not anymore." Clara swallowed hard. The words hung between them, fragile yet electrifying. For a moment, she felt as if the city had disappeared, leaving only the two of them standing in a space that seemed suspended in time. She wanted to reach out, to close the distance that had grown in their shared glances and unspoken moments. But something, fear, caution, a whisper of professionalism held her back. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "Not just the arrangement, but everything else." Jonathan's expression softened. He took a cautious step closer. "You don't have to decide now. But you should know this: I didn't expect to feel this way about anyone. Least of all someone I was supposed to treat as part of a transaction. You've changed that, and I can't pretend it hasn't happened." The intensity of his words struck Clara like a physical force. She had spent her life keeping her emotions tucked neatly away, hidden behind practicality and necessity. Yet here, under the quiet night sky, with the city sleeping around them, she felt those carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. They walked in silence for a while, letting the sound of their footsteps echo softly in the empty park. Clara realized that every smile, every carefully timed laugh during the events had begun to feel real. And Jonathan, stoic, controlled, unyielding, Jonathan had started to show the smallest cracks in his armor, hints of a man who had forgotten what it meant to let someone in. When they reached the bridge that arched over the river, Jonathan paused, resting his hands on the railing. Clara leaned beside him, both of them staring into the water below, where the lights of the city danced and shimmered like scattered stars. "Clara," he said finally, his voice low, carrying a weight that made her stomach flutter, "this isn't just about appearances anymore. I've tried to keep it simple, to maintain the rules, the boundaries, but every time I see you, I realize that simplicity is impossible. You've made it complicated, and maybe that's exactly what it should be." Clara's chest tightened. She had imagined countless scenarios since the contract began, moments of awkwardness, arguments, polite distance, but she had never allowed herself to imagine this, a connection so raw and undeniable that it left her breathless, caught between fear and exhilaration. And then, as if sensing the precise moment to test the fragile tension between them, Jonathan turned toward her, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "I don't want to lose what we're finding here, even if it means breaking rules I've lived by for years. But I need to know, are you willing to risk it with me?" Clara felt the world tilt. Everything she had known about her life, about the careful plans she had made to survive, seemed distant and insignificant compared to the decision before her now. The contract, the pretense, the rehearsed smiles, it all paled against the raw, undeniable truth of what had started to grow between them. Her lips parted to respond, and in that instant, a single thought crystallized in her mind: life rarely offers second chances, and when it does, it often comes disguised as something you weren't expecting. She took a deep breath, ready to take the leap, unaware that the choice she was about to make would set in motion a chain of events. Neither of them could have predicted events that would test their courage, their trust, and the unexpected depths of the bond they were beginning to discover. And as the wind whispered across the bridge, carrying the scent of rain and possibility, Clara realized that the real story was only just beginning and that the path ahead, though uncertain, might lead to something far more extraordinary than either of them had ever imagined. The days that followed were filled with an unusual tension, one neither Clara nor Jonathan could ignore. Each meeting, each dinner, each carefully orchestrated social event was now layered with unspoken words and hidden emotions. Clara noticed herself walking with a lighter step, her smiles more genuine, her laughter carrying a warmth that had been absent for years. Yet, beneath it all, a quiet anxiety gnawed at her. She was stepping into territory she had no map for, a place where feelings could not be measured by contracts or schedules. Jonathan, too, carried a subtle shift in his demeanor. The rigid control that had defined him softened just enough for Clara to see glimpses of the man beneath the impeccable exterior. His eyes lingered a fraction longer on her when he thought she wasn't looking, and his voice, usually precise and measured, now held an unexpected warmth when he addressed her. Yet there remained a tension, a hesitance born of fear of losing control, of exposing vulnerability, of risking a heart that had been carefully guarded for too long. One evening, after a particularly demanding charity gala, Jonathan invited Clara to his private office to review upcoming events. The room was quiet, the city lights casting a gentle glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Clara perched on the edge of a chair, still in her elegant gown, feeling both exhilarated and exhausted. "I need to know something," Jonathan said, his voice unusually soft. He stood by the window, looking out at the shimmering skyline. "This, whatever is happening between us, it can't be ignored, but I need to know if you're willing to step beyond the arrangement. If you are, we need honesty. No pretense, no contracts, no guidelines. Just truth." Clara's breath caught. She had rehearsed countless responses in her mind, yet none of them fit the moment. She realized then that the truth was simpler and more terrifying than any script she could have written. She was already invested. Her feelings had grown beyond control, and the thought of stepping back, of returning to the safety of anonymity and routine, felt unbearable. She began, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if I can go back to pretending. I don't want to. Not anymore." Jonathan turned to her, the faintest shadow of a smile brushing his lips. His eyes, usually guarded and analytical, were now soft, searching. "Then we'll navigate this together," he said. "Step by step, moment by moment. But you must understand, this path isn't simple. There will be challenges, misunderstandings, obstacles we cannot foresee. Are you prepared for that?" Clara nodded, her resolve firming. "Yes, I want to try. I want to see where this leads." A silence settled between them, charged with possibility. It was a fragile, delicate moment, the kind that felt suspended in time. Clara realized that despite the uncertainty, despite the risks, she had never felt more alive, more seen, or more understood. Over the next few weeks, their relationship shifted in subtle, profound ways. Small gestures became significant, Jonathan offering his coat when she shivered, Clara sharing a laugh at an inside joke no one else would understand, quiet conversations late at night about dreams, fears, and everything in between. The world outside continued to move at its relentless pace, but within the bubble they created together, time seemed to bend, allowing them to explore emotions they had long kept hidden. Yet even as their bond deepened, shadows of doubt lingered. Clara found herself questioning whether this was sustainable, whether the foundation built on a contract could withstand the weight of genuine affection. Jonathan, for his part, wrestled with his own fears, fear of loss, fear of vulnerability, fear that opening his heart might bring unforeseen consequences. One rainy evening, as they walked along the quiet streets after a private dinner, Clara spoke first. "Jonathan, do you ever wonder if we're rushing? If we're letting things happen too fast?" He stopped, turning to face her. The rain kissed their faces, and the city lights blurred in the wet streets. "Every day," he admitted. "But the truth is, I don't want to stop, and I don't want to hold back. Not anymore. Life is too short, and moments like these, They don't come twice. Clara's heart surged. She had spent so long measuring her choices, weighing risks, and protecting herself that she had forgotten what it felt like to leap without certainty. Yet, standing there in the rain, with Jonathan's eyes locked on hers, she felt a courage she hadn't known she possessed. The tension, the fear, the uncertainty, they all melted into a single, undeniable truth. What had begun as a simple contract, a temporary arrangement, had grown into something neither of them could have anticipated. Something real, something transformative, something worth every risk, every moment of doubt, every ounce of courage they could muster. And as the rain fell softly round them, Clara knew that the most challenging part was yet to come. The world outside their bubble would not be as forgiving, and the next choices they made could define not just their relationship, but the very trajectory of their lives. The hook was clear. Their bond had shifted from pretense to truth. But now the real test awaited, a moment that would challenge their trust, their courage, and their ability to believe in a love neither had expected. The days that followed were a delicate dance of emotion, trust, and anticipation. Clara and Jonathan had crossed the invisible line between arrangement and reality. But life had a way of testing even the strongest bonds. Every glance, every conversation, every laugh they shared was now tinged with a fragile intensity. A recognition that the world outside their connection could challenge it at any moment. One morning, Clara received a message from Adrian. "Mr. Hayes requests your presence at the office immediately. Urgent matters to discuss." Her chest tightened. Jonathan rarely summoned her in such a formal manner, and the weight in her stomach told her instinctively that today would not be ordinary. She hurried through her preparations, the city outside buzzing with the usual chaos, unaware that the hours ahead would redefine everything between them. Upon entering Jonathan's office, Clara noticed the rare tension in his posture. He was usually unflappable, but today, he seemed human. A man pulled between duty, expectation, and the unexpected vulnerability she had come to know so intimately. "Clara," he began, voice steady but tinged with something unfamiliar, "I need to speak frankly. There's a matter regarding our agreement. Something I cannot ignore." Clara's heart raced. The old contract, the one that had brought them together under pretense, was supposed to dictate boundaries, timelines, and expectations. But she had long since realized that the contract had become irrelevant. What mattered now was what lay between them, unspoken yet undeniable. "I want us to step beyond the limitations of that agreement," Jonathan continued, taking a step closer. "I don't want pretense anymore. I don't want rules. I want reality. And reality, Clara, is that I care for you deeply, irrevocably, without hesitation. But the world outside won't understand. We'll face scrutiny, judgment, and perhaps doubt. Are you willing to confront that with me?" Clara felt a rush of warmth and fear. She had spent so long protecting her heart, measuring every risk, calculating every possibility. Yet, in that moment, she realized that the greatest risk had always been in remaining cautious, in refusing to embrace the unknown. She took a deep breath, letting the words form naturally, unpolished yet true. "Yes," she said simply, her voice unwavering. "I'm willing, because this what we have, it's real, and I won't let fear dictate it." A faint smile broke across Jonathan's face, one that softened the rigid lines of his features and revealed a vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to witness. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, comfortably, as if they had always belonged together. From that moment, their lives shifted. The contract no longer held weight. It was replaced by trust, respect, and the raw, unfiltered emotions that had grown quietly between them. They navigated social obligations, professional challenges, and personal expectations together, supporting each other through moments of doubt and celebrating moments of triumph. Clara found herself discovering courage she hadn't known she possessed, speaking up in meetings, making decisions with confidence, and embracing life's unpredictability with Jonathan by her side. Jonathan, in turn, learned the delicate art of vulnerability, understanding that strength was not only in control but in openness, compassion, and the willingness to share one's heart. One evening, as the city lights shimmered across the skyline, Jonathan led Clara to the rooftop terrace of his building. The wind was gentle, carrying the faint scent of rain and the promise of new beginnings. "Clara," he said softly. Our journey began as a contract, a simple arrangement. But it has become far more than that. It has become a partnership, a connection, a story worth telling. And I want the rest of our story to be written together, without pretense, without boundaries, only truth. Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, a mixture of relief, joy, and awe. I've never believed in coincidences, she whispered. But meeting you, it feels like destiny. Jonathan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Perhaps it is. Perhaps the universe has a way of guiding us toward what we need, even if it comes disguised as a challenge, a contract, or a test. The important part is recognizing it when it arrives and daring to embrace it. They stood together, hand in hand, overlooking a city that suddenly seemed alive with possibility. The past, the contracts, the struggles, the uncertainty was behind them, replaced by a shared vision of courage, hope, and love. They had found in each other not just a companion, but a partner, a confidant, and a soulmate. And in that quiet, transformative moment, Clara realized something profound. Life's most extraordinary gifts often arrive in unexpected forms, disguised as challenges or unlikely opportunities. The true measure of courage is not in avoiding fear, but in choosing to step forward anyway, trusting that the heart knows a path that reason alone cannot see. As the wind whispered around them, carrying the city's pulse and the echoes of their shared laughter, Clara and Jonathan faced the horizon together, undaunted, inspired, and ready to embrace the extraordinary life that had always been waiting for them. And so, a story that began as a simple arrangement, a fleeting contract, transformed into a timeless tale of love, courage, and the remarkable power of believing in what the heart can see even when the world cannot.